I want to be clear about one thing before I tell you how it went with Warden Chelk. I didn't plan any of it. I wasn't running some kind of scheme. I was fixing the north fence line when his transport came over the ridge, and I kept fixing it, because the wire was already half-threaded, and a half-threaded fence is a wasted morning if you walk away from it. That's the part people don't believe. They want me to have had some strategy. I didn't. I had a fence to finish, and 7 Veskari Fanlings sleeping in a loose pile near the old water trough, and I had learned by then that the smartest thing a man could do in their company was move slowly and talk quietly and pretend that nothing in the world was especially urgent. I had been on Keskar Ridge for 3 growing seasons before the first Fanling showed up at my property line. She came alone, which I later understood was unusual, because Veskari are pack animals in the deepest sense. Solitary behavior in a young one typically means she'd been separated, or that something had gone wrong with the unit. She sat at the edge of my field and watched me turn the soil, and I watched her back, and eventually I put some water out in a trough I wasn't using and went inside. She was there the next morning. I'd read what the Frontier Settlement Authority publishes about Veskari. Do not feed, do not approach, do not make eye contact for extended periods, report sightings to your sector office, maintain a 40-meter exclusion buffer. The document ran to 16 pages. Then I watched that young female, who couldn't have been more than 4 months out of the den, trying to drink from a trough an inch too tall for her, and I walked out and lowered it. I didn't touch her, I didn't speak. I adjusted the fitting and walked back to the house. By the end of that week there were 3 of them. By the end of the month, 7. I won't pretend I wasn't nervous at the start. Veskari adults can bring down a ridge elk in under a minute, and the Fanlings grow fast. The largest of my 7, the male I called Grit because of the gravel-gray ruff around his shoulders, was already pushing waist height by the 2nd season. But I had learned something about them that the authority's 16-page document did not mention, and it was this. They were watching me the whole time, just as I was watching them, and whatever they were measuring, I must have passed, because they never tested me the way they tested strangers. Strangers, they circled. Strangers, they made uneasy. A supply runner from Sector 14 refused to deliver past my gate for 4 months, until I started meeting him at the road. Me, they followed. Not close, not clingy, but present. If I was in the north field, they were at the north field's edge. If I was at the press shed, 1 or 2 were outside the door. They didn't ask anything except the water and the occasional dried protein block I put out evenings. They weren't pets. They remained precisely what they were. Apex pack predators of the Keskar Highland, operating within their own logic. I just happened to be a fixed point they had decided, for reasons of their own, to include in their calculations. That was the situation when Chelk's transport came over the ridge. I had been expecting something. The authority had sent 3 notices in the past 6 months. The settlement buffer had been reclassified. Keskar Ridge was now designated sensitive predator habitat, and homesteaders within the new boundary were being relocated to the lowland settlement blocks. 2 of my neighbors had already gone. I had filed 2 appeals and lost both. I knew a removal officer was coming. I just hadn't expected him to bring enforcement officers, plural, with full field equipment. Chelk was a compact man, officious, the kind of official who wears his uniform as a form of argument. He had a data slate under his arm, and 2 enforcement officers behind him, carrying long-range deterrent rods that would have been appropriate if they were dealing with an adult Veskari pack, not a single farmer fixing fence wire. He read the removal order aloud. Full language, all the clauses. I let him finish. You're aware you've been in violation of the Predator Proximity Statute for 2 seasons. I'm aware you've been trying to tell me that, I said. He didn't like that. He clicked something on the data slate and looked up to deliver the next piece, the part about mandatory relocation and property forfeiture. And that was when I heard the soft pad of paws on dry grass behind me. I didn't look around. I knew what was coming by the sound. 4 feet, light, then 4 more, and then the heavier thud of Grit, who always moved like he was deciding how much weight to put into each step. I heard them settle. I said, quietly, not to Chelk, just into the general air, stay close. And they did. I heard one of the enforcement officers make a sound that wasn't quite a word. I turned, then, because I was curious what it looked like from the outside, and I'll admit, it was something to see. The 7 Fanlings had arranged themselves in a wedge behind me. Not a loose sleeping pile, not a scattered perimeter watch, but a proper unit formation. The kind of shape a pack takes when it is moving together through territory it considers its own. Grit anchored the center. The 2 smallest, the ones I had privately named Silt and Chalk for the color of their fur, held the forward flanks. The others filled the ranks with their shoulders touching. They were not snarling. They were not showing teeth. They were simply present, 7 pairs of amber eyes forward, steady, watching Chelk with the calm attention of creatures who have decided that this particular situation does not require urgency. That calm was the thing that undid him. If they'd growled, he could have called it a threat and dealt with it. But they just watched him, the way a very old unit watches something that has not yet become a problem, and might not. Chelk looked at me. He looked at the Fanlings. He looked at his enforcement officers, who had both taken a very deliberate step backward, and were now doing calculations of their own. "These are bonded?" he said. His voice had changed register. "I wouldn't know how to bond a Veskari," I said. "I just fixed their water trough." He looked at the data slate like it might offer him something useful. It didn't. The statute he had come to enforce covered human predator exclusion zones, not predator pack territorial bond law, which is a separate section of the Frontier Code entirely, and runs to considerably more than 16 pages. The short version of that separate section, as I understood it, was that a Veskari pack's voluntary territorial anchor, meaning the fixed point the pack had chosen to organize around, carried habitat protection standing equivalent to a den site. I am not a lawyer, but Chelk evidently was not either, or at least not the right kind. He stood in my north field for a long moment. Grit's tail moved once, slow, the way it did when he was paying attention to something that hadn't made up its mind yet. "There will need to be a formal review," Chelk said. "That sounds reasonable," I said. He looked at me. He looked at the 7 Fanlings in their wedge. He made a note on his data slate that I suspected was going to cause someone in the Sector 14 office a significant administrative headache. "You understand this doesn't constitute a rescission?" "I understand," I said. He left. His 2 enforcement officers left faster, which I noted but did not mention. I stood in the north field for a moment and then crouched down, because Silt and Chalk had broken formation and were pushing their narrow muzzles against my hands, the way they did when they wanted the dried protein blocks and weren't willing to wait for evening. Grit sat where he was, still watching the place where the transport had been, unhurried. I gave Silt and Chalk a block each. I scratched Grit behind the ear, which he tolerated, with the dignity of a creature who has decided that this particular indignity is acceptable from this particular person. The formal review took 4 months. At the end of it, Keskar Ridge Homestead was reclassified as a secondary habitat anchor site under the Frontier Predator Code. A 3-page notation in the settlement registry describes my farm as an active Veskari territorial node and recommends against any actions likely to destabilize the pack's voluntary boundary configuration. I sent a note of thanks to the Frontier Code office and never received a reply. I finished fixing the fence that afternoon. The Fanlings moved with me along the fence line, not interfering, not in the way, just present and deliberate the way they always were. Grit at my left shoulder, the others spread in their loose half-circle behind. I stopped once to check the wire tension and heard the soft sound of 7 animals settling into the grass at my back, patient and certain, as though there had never been any question about how this was going to go. There hadn't been, not for them. I'm not sure exactly when they decided I was worth keeping. Not the water trough alone. Somewhere in those first weeks of moving slowly and speaking quietly, and treating them like they had their own judgment, which they did. Like they were making a real choice, which they were. They chose the farm. They chose the fence line, and the press shed, and the old water trough. They chose me. I just tried to be worth it.